City Matters.
Hello, and thank you for joining me today. I'm your host, Bernie Furshpan. This podcast is a production of the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center of Nassau County. On today's episode of Raised by Survivors on HMTV, my special guest, Howard Maier, will join me on a conversation about what it was like for him being raised by survivors. Howard Maier, thank you so much for joining me today. We'll be talking about the guiding force behind the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, which you are. You've been a guiding force for many years. You led the transformation of the center from a small memorial space into a modern state-of-the-art museum, and we thank you for that. And it's also an educational institution, well known here on Long Island. Under your leadership, HMTC expanded its exhibits, deepened its outreach to students and communities, and strengthens its mission to confront hate through education. As chairman emeritus, his impact is still felt in the center's growth, and that's why I have him here today. Thank you so much, Howard, for joining me today.
Thank you, Bernie.
It's been quite a number of years that you've been involved. I would say up to 3 decades?
Not quite, but over 25.
For those that are meeting you for the first time, how would you describe your family's Holocaust story?
Truthfully, they didn't talk about the Holocaust that much, if at all. Aunts and uncles did in later years. But my parents, most of growing up was as an immigrant and realizing how different we were. I'll give you an example. I went to school, kindergarten, speaking only German. And that's because our grandparents lived with us, and so in the house, German was spoken. My parents ran a deli. They had a deli, and we lived upstairs. In the deli, most of the people who came were other German Jews. We lived on the Upper West Side where the German Jews had. So German was spoken. If I was even down in the delicatessen listening to people, it was German. So, but going to kindergarten, life was expanded for me, and really didn't, back to your question of speaking about the Holocaust, not until really later years of finding out why they were kicked out of Germany or emigrated from Germany at different stages of different members of the family.
We have parallel lives in that both my parents are survivors, and they didn't speak much about it. I actually watched them watch films on TV of the Holocaust and watch them react to it. And that's how I kind of got the idea that there's some kind of connection between them and the Holocaust until I got somewhat older, and then they started telling me some little tidbits of what happened. Now, they didn't speak German in my home. They spoke Yiddish. And when they realized that I started learning Yiddish from them because I understood everything they were saying, they switched to Polish.
Very good.
When did you realize, when was the first time you realized that your family was kind of different? Do you remember what age that was? And that you were raised slightly different than your friends?
I'd say the biggest impact was at ages 8, 9, 10, realizing that your parents spoke with an accent, and even when they spoke German, you would say to them, speak English, we're in America now. The guilt that I have years later with those kind of comments, but it's just a recognition that we were different. We were from an economic point of view, the have-nots. Mm-hmm. Not that that was a big deal, but you realize that other children have a new bicycle and mine barely works, that kind of thing. But I'd say that those are the bigger issues.
Mm. My mother raised me and my twin brother on Polish food, which many people think is Jewish or kosher food, but it's really Polish food, like stuffed cabbage, chopped liver, and all of these things. Many Holocaust parents actually switched over. They assimilated to the culture here in the United States and fed their kids American food. What did you eat?
Well, we had a lot of worst.
Oh, worst.
Bologna, salami. And I have an anecdote that I think you will enjoy. There's a delicatessen that was on the Upper West Side called Blau Falk. And when I still have this recollection to this day, and I've shared it with members of my family, my grandfather, David, my father's father, took me there one morning. I was 2 years old. And to make a very long story short, he left without me. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden, I realize I'm all alone. Age 2. Well, to make a long story short, the owners, the woman, it was one of the women, I don't know whether she was a Blau or a Falk, but she kept feeding me bologna to keep me happy as I was sitting down. And it was not until like an hour later that my mother rescued me because they realized my grandfather came back home with all the worst that he had purchased that day, but left me back in the delicatessen. So that's a Blau and Falk worst story for me.
Well, you were never hungry, right? I mean, there was a lot of food in that.
No, although, and I think even in later years, when we lived upstate, we moved to upstate New York, a small town by the name of Norwich. When we went back to New York City to visit, my elderly grandmother was in a facility, and we visited aunts and uncles, but we'd always stop at Blau and Falk, buy some of the various things that my father especially liked, and as did the children. We would put dry ice on it and drive it back to upstate. So we grew up on Wurst.
You know, most of the listening audience are not really familiar with the term delicatessen. They know the term deli, New York-style deli. And the word delicatessen is a German word. Most people don't know that it means delicate or fine food. Essen means to eat. And that's a concept that has been brought from Germany by many Jewish Holocaust survivors that opened up the delicatessens, like your family.
What's really interesting to me is how the people gravitated to certain areas. Example, the Upper West Side, there were a lot of German Jews. Why? Right. Because they were comfortable speaking German when going to a hairdresser or shopping for groceries. The Lower East Side, heavily Polish. And so we were all assimilating children from survivors, but in our own areas. And as you mentioned earlier, with our own types of food. Mm-hmm. So there are obviously many similarities among survivors, but also a lot of differences.
My brother and I had front row seats to two people with PTSD, and they suffered greatly in the war. My father would wake up in the middle of the night crying, and I never knew why for many years until my mom told me the story of him surviving in the forest and what he had to do to stay alive in minus 20 degrees, no less. Did you ever see your parents cry or get emotional about the stories?
My parents, no, but my aunt, now this is in later years, my Aunt Gertrude, my mother died at a very early age. She was only 42. And my Aunt Gertrude lived nearby, and as I grew older, she and I became very close. And she had many experiences in Germany, and then in France. She was a freedom fighter, and what she endured, she became extremely emotional at times in sharing what happened to her, what happened to her family members, and much of my knowledge in terms of what happened to the family was through her. And it was also in her house. My Aunt Gertrude and Uncle Larry lived in a farm near where I grew up. My grandfather lived. He was incarcerated on Kristallnacht in Dachau. And I also learned some from him during those years of growing up. So he would open up a little more, but in terms of talking about it at home, no, that was not what we spoke about at home. Were much more the importance of being in America. Not importance, not the right word, but my parents talked about the freedoms that they had. To become an American citizen meant so much. To be able to vote and not to be told how to vote or how to do this. And democracy was just so important to both my parents.
We live in a great country, that's for sure.
Yes.
And many people take it for granted. As many problems as we have, right? As many problems as we have, it's still the greatest country. There's no doubt about it. I've traveled the world with my wife, and we're always happy to be back in the good old USA.
My wife says the same thing. Every time we are back, it always reminds me of, as you said, how fortunate we are to be here.
Truly fortunate, truly fortunate. My parents had two different stories. You know, my mother, with her family, lived closer to the border of Germany. So when Hitler crossed the border on September 1st, 1939, they fled. They went to Russia. They went on a train, a 1,400-mile journey. My grandmother gets off the train to get food for her hungry children. My mother was only 2 years old. The train left without my grandmother. The kids were on it, and it took my grandmother 5 years to find all 4 kids. My mother ended up in a Christian orphanage in Russia. So they didn't actually see a lot of the atrocities, whereas my father did. My father was on the other side of Poland, closer to Russia. And so everything to them was hearsay. When the Germans crossed the border, we've been through this before. It's not the end of the world. They actually had a welcoming committee in their village for the Nazis when they entered. They had no clue what they were up against. So my father, who was only one out of 30 people that survived from 1,500 Jews in that little village. So he literally went through hell. So they both have two different stories, but they're both very powerful stories, and they both suffered a lot. What can you tell us about your family, what they went through?
Well, to the point that you're making about your parents, when I went to Yad Vashem as part of a learning experience a number of maybe 25 years ago, they shared with us the challenges that parents had in making decisions. And in my mother's family's case, they sent the youngest daughter to England via Kindertransport. Now just think about making a decision to begin to separate your children. My mother was second youngest. She was slightly too old for Kindertransport, so they still made the decision to send her to England. And she was sent to be a domestic, and she worked as a domestic for 3 years in England. People are going to England now, a language they don't know. Right. They're speaking German. And when you go back of what did people endure, my mother shared of how her education was stopped. She could no longer go to school after 8th grade. She wasn't allowed to sit on the park benches. Her bike was confiscated, as all the Jewish bikes were. And the point that I really wanted to make is the decision that my parents had to make of separating children from their parents and sending them, not knowing exactly what was going to happen, because the, quote, war had not started. Germany had not invaded Poland, but life was so terrible for the Jews. They were, the negativity, they were spat at, all of that. And you have to endure those things, and therefore, as parents, you're saying, now, some families fled, others did not. They thought they would ride it through. There's been unrest before. And to realize that in Germany, the Jewish population was such a minor role. Less than 1% of the population was Jewish. And yet Hitler and the Nazi propaganda still utilized the Jews as the reason that we're having all the problems, the economic problems, and the potential war, all those things going on. But really, economic was always the Jews' fault. Now, who were the Jews? Well, they were like my family. Just my mother was a child. My father was a child. Their parents were farmers, cattle dealers. These were not the individuals that Hitler was targeting, and yet he targeted all. Burned down the synagogues, as we know, on Kristallnacht. But it didn't start even in 1938. We think of it, book burning, all the Jewish books were burned in 1935. So for several years before Hitler's actions became very open, he was trying to cleanse Germany of Jews and other not individuals that were not wanted, the gypsies, homosexuals, etc.
As we're winding down this conversation, let's say you had the opportunity to talk to your parents. What would you like to say to them about how you're carrying the legacy forward with this center here?
The fact that we are positively influencing young people as well as the police officers who come here to make them, to have people understand that when they see injustice, any form of injustice, any aggressive act toward people, to stand up to help them, because during the Holocaust, as we know, it did not start with the killing of people, but rather it started with the degrading of individuals and types of individuals. We see a lot of that going on right now. We call it antisemitism, but it's not just actions against Jews. It's actions against many individuals for various reasons. And we as an organization stand up. We remember the Holocaust and all the tragedies that happened, not just to the 6 million who passed, but even survivors like our families, and the lessons that they taught us. And now, in turn, we are using that to teach the lessons of the Holocaust to all the individuals who come here. So I think that would make my parents feel good. Knowing that it's a step in helping democracy allow us to have our freedoms.
You know, in the last 2 years, I've seen the education department expand in terms of how many educators and docents we have. We have a nice group of, well-informed, wonderful people who are generously donating their time to educate young people. Do you feel a sense of hope for the future here on Long Island and in the United States and the rest of the world to some degree, as in spite of what's happening out there, which to me is really a small percentage? The news covers it, so we think it's everywhere. It's really the silent majority out there that we want to talk to. And so do you feel...
Very well said.
Yeah, do
Very
you feel
well
like
said.
there's a sense of hope with the kind of work that we're doing in other institutions like ourselves?
Absolutely. And even this kind of communication. The fact that 40,000 young people come here annually, or the podcasts that reach out to thousands and thousands. In addition, the number of programs that we do that we electronically do for other areas. We are influencing people, and I think your parents and my parents would say that we're sort of living in their legacy.
Yes, I agree. I think my parents would be very proud and mortified at the same time in terms of what's happening out there. I don't think that they would, expect to see anything to this degree, the level of anti-Semitism that existed this past couple of years in the colleges and in the streets and in various countries, and the attack on Israel by Hamas. But they've been through it. So we are the product of incredible resilience, you and I.
I was just thinking that same
you
word.
You and I, the Jews were persecuted for thousands of years.
Exactly.
So it's kind of like refining a diamond. We are truly a sharp diamond that is resilient. We have it in our genes that we can withstand almost anything.
We're smiling about it, and yet we shouldn't.
Yeah, but you're right.
It's like Jews have endured. We shall continue to endure.
Yes,
and yet it's very painful, as our families experienced, and as Israeli families have just experienced, have been experienced for the last 2 years.
Yeah.
And years, even before that, all the negativity toward the Zionist state. And aren't we fortunate that we have Israel?
And we're grateful for that. And I'm grateful for you, for all you've done here at the
thank
center.
You for being as involved as you are. I mean that most sincerely. You wear many hats. I know you don't physically have a hat on right now, but whether it's your marketing hat or your museum hat, you've done a wonderful job here, and it's truly a pleasure having you in our family.
Well, you're a tough act to follow. I mean, there's a lot of people who try to emulate the level of enthusiasm and commitment and passion that you've had, and I have certainly looked up to you as a role model here. And I thank you for all the things that you've done, and this opportunity for me to be part of the board, to have the opportunity to open up this incredible podcast studio, which we've done just about 350 episodes in almost a year.
Very exciting. Truly is. I congratulate you on the vision of doing it, and the implementation is, we're here. Humanity matters. Very well said.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much, Howard, for joining me today, and my guests that have been on our programs for the last 10 months, who have really made an impact with our platform, our podcast platform, HMTV, Humanity Matters TV, here at HMTC. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of Raised by Survivors on HMTV. I want to thank once again, Howard Maier for sharing his incredible insights about his family, about himself, and the things that he's done here at the museum and educational institution here. If you enjoyed exploring the information, history, and stories in today's conversation, be sure to check out our other podcasts here on HMTV. Please subscribe, share, and stay connected for more engaging conversations. Until then, take care and be well.